It is Wednesday, February 13th, 2019. My name is Ashton Ellett from the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia. I'm here today with Mr. James E. Stewart Jr. He's chairman of the board of Stewart Candy Company here in Waycross, Georgia, and he's also a proud alumnus of the University of Georgia. We're here to record a Richard B. Russell oral history documentary film. And I wonder if we could begin the interview telling me a little bit about your childhood and your parents and growing up here in South Georgia.
Okay, I've been reflecting on that a little bit because I thought that would probably be the lead question. And I'm pretty clear from age 4 on.
Okay.
The reason I can go back to age 4, 2 events happened in my life that year. One was that my parents went to the Chicago World's Fair and left me with 2 aunts. And that was the first time I'd been separated from my parents.
Okay.
And of course, they, since I was the only grandson from 6 siblings, I got quite a bit of attention, particularly from the 2 aunts who were old maids. But they kept me for that week that parents were gone and made every effort to be sure that I wasn't frightened or didn't get everything I wanted. So it was an impact on me.
You seem to survive in one piece anyway from that experience.
Well, that's kind of where it started. That from my memory, and the same year, Daddy built his new building. He had been renting a building on Albany Avenue since 1922 when he came to Waycross to start his business. And by 1934, even though it was in the depths of the Depression,
right,
he had accumulated enough capital to build his own building. And Mama and I would go down just about every day to watch the progress. And he had ordered his bricks from Meriwether Brick Company in Augusta. And they came in a boxcar. And he was building his building across the street from where they could place that boxcar. And they had a human chain of people unloading that boxcar of bricks one at a time across the street and locating them where the building was being constructed. And that chain just really impressed me even at that age. That I thought that was a lot of ingenuity. That how would they move a boxcar load of bricks, and they moved them one brick at a time. So those 2 events in 1934 kind of kicked off my memory cycle. And I guess the next event was when I went to kindergarten, when I was 5. And a young lady who had the kindergarten, her father was a local doctor, but he was a Republican. And that's
a rare thing in those days.
A rare thing in those days. And it was certainly a discussion point for people who would send their children to this kindergarten because they would be exposed to Republicans. But anyway, the lady did a super job. And kind of ironically, the group that she built there, gathered there when I went, we followed each other all the way through grammar school, middle school, and high school. I guess 70–80% of that kindergarten class stayed together all the way through school.
That's amazing.
And yeah, it was, and it built up some close bonds. There's only a couple of us left, but we knew each other real well. And I was never a very good student. I really didn't have a lot of interest in being a good student. So I just kind of wandered along, and they were kind enough to promote me each year. And things went real well along then. When I finally got to the university, I had a real shock, but that was part of growing up. But we were a very close family, just Mom and Daddy and myself. They both came from large families, six siblings, which we are pretty familiar with, and they were close to two different Mom and Daddy's family. And Mama's family had other cousins, but I was the only child in Daddy's family. So we were closer to his family, and both because they took such an interest in me personally. The two aunts did.
Right.
And we would often go. Daddy worked 6 days a week, but Saturday afternoon we would load up and go to Valdosta where they lived and spend the night. And Mama home was about 15 miles, 20 miles outside of Valdosta, near Ray City. And she would a lot of times go stay with her people, and I would stay there with Daddy and his people. But this was a ritual that we carried on as long as my aunts were living, and the two other brothers that had survived were living. We would particularly gather there at Christmas. We celebrated all our Christmases in Valdosta. I never knew a Christmas at home. We went to Valdosta to my aunts and my grandparents, and Santa Claus came down the chimney there. And I was graciously greeted with a number of gifts because these two aunts would buy stuff all year long to have there for Christmas time. So I was definitely overspoiled in material goods.
So tell me, how did the Stewarts, or when did the Stewarts come to Waycross, Georgia? How did that come about?
Okay. Well, Mama's family was in Ray City, which was close to Waycross. Daddy's family was outside of Dawson, in Brooksville, a hamlet called Brooksville. And how his family got there, I don't know. My parents never discussed their history. What I picked up is just from side comments that were made and some observations that I had observed. I don't know their background beyond my great-grandparents, actually. I knew a little bit about them. We have in our home a piano that came from my great-grandmother's family. And she graduated from a ladies' finishing school, and we have her diploma that's on sheepskin. So we know from that side of the family there was some educational background. But by the time my daddy and his family were in my memory, their history was in my memory, they lived on really a hardscuffle farm, if you will. And they produced plenty of personal food. They had gardens, and they tried to grow cotton and tried to grow peanuts, and seemed like the boll weevil hit them, and peanut market was not very strong. So Daddy only went through the 5th grade because that was only school that was in walking distance of his home, and he had no way of going to a higher institution. A couple of the sisters went and stayed with family members in a neighboring town, and one of them, Annie, actually graduated from high school. But the boys, the 3 brothers, none had formal education beyond just the grade school years. The oldest brother was really an entrepreneur. He left home when he was about 16 years old. And I don't know his journey completely, but I know he wound up in Valdosta And he had by that time built him a pecan business. He had, I don't know, he had a 3-story building there that must have had 40 or 50 pickers that picked pecans by hand. That's my memory of the early 30s. And he worked his other siblings in the business. And they, like siblings, they had their differences. But and the result of that was that Daddy left in 1922 when he was 24 years old and came to Waycross. And he had been accumulating the few dollars he was able to earn from his brother, and he had $400. And he had some old candy making equipment, and he loaded it on a train and he intended to go to Savannah. And he wanted to get to a big city where he could do his thing. And when he got to Savannah, they had a private electric company. In those days, the cities had their own electrical system, and they varied from city to city. And his equipment was not compatible with the electrical system in Savannah, and he didn't have the money to modify it. So he came back to Waycross, which was the next largest town around. And in the 1920s, Waycross was 4th or 5th in the state. People are not aware of that, but because of the railroads that came through here and the Hibbert Cypress Company that cut the Okefenokee Swamp, it had been a very industrious and prosperous community. So he was in the best environment he could get in, given all the circumstances. So from that beginning, he grew his business. And Mama was the second oldest of the daughters on a six-member family, and her oldest sister walked the proverbial 5 miles in the snow to school every day. And when she was 4 years old, she started following her to school. And by the time she was 5 years old, they let her begin school. So she started the first grade when she was 5 years old, and by the time she was 15 or 16, she had gone through all the local educational facilities. The Baptist Church had an institution and a facility a few miles from where they lived that provided her with some high school education. And she got a job as helping a school teacher. And during the year, that school teacher died. And the school board was hard up for money, and so instead of hiring a replacement, they made Mama the teacher in the rural school. And she stayed there a couple of years, and she wanted to see the city lights too, so she moved to Waycross. And from that, she and Daddy became friends, and those things kind of do. They wound up in marriage, and both of them were. The church was important to them almost from the beginning, and I must put it in at this time because while Daddy worked 6 days a week, Sunday was always church day, and that was Sunday school, morning service, evening service, and all of the goods that went along with it.
And this is the Methodist Church?
Methodist Church, and it was it is as strong as churches are today. It was very strong here in Waycross, and it provided the family with the opportunity, since they had no roots here, nobody knew them basically. They established themselves in the community through the church, and it's been important to our family too. And I want to I sure want to get that on the record that all of our children have been very active in the family. I progressed through elementary, junior, senior high school, and those particular spectacularity, if you will, I was just a student. But all along, and I don't know at what point of this discussion to put this on the table, but I have been blessed personally beyond all value. And I just wonder why so many good things have happened to me. I'm almost frightened that if I've had it so good here on planet Earth, what in the world, where am I going? am I going to have to catch up with the bad life?
Well, I don't know about that,
but anyway, it just from getting to go to the University of Georgia, and there's a story there.
Let's talk about the university, because you were the first generation of your family to go to university.
That's great.
What was it like making the transition from Waycross, Georgia to Athens, Georgia back in I guess this would be the late 40s, 1948?
48, yeah.
Okay.
It was a tremendous transition. Our family, my family, was not travelers, and I don't mean to digress too far here. I don't know, but I want to make the point that they came to Athens 2 times while I was there, and one of them was when I graduated. So I was. You
were on your own.
I was on my own, and I don't know that I made the best of it, but the particular story was about music. I had a birth injury and could not use my left arm very effectively. And so I didn't participate in any sports. And I really didn't have enough coordination. If I had participated, I could have done much. But I was in the band, and I joined the band when I was in junior high school. And by the time I graduated from high school, the Athletic Association at the University of Georgia wanted a marching band. Alabama had what they called the $1 Million Band, and they would come to Athens and they'd fill up the field with their band. And Georgia had a little small band that they were too embarrassed to put on the field. So the Athletic Association had enough power to have these music scholarships issued to have their band. And so they hired them a hotshot band director, and he sent out these messages around the state to local band directors that he was building a band, and he needed X number of different types of instruments to play in it. And ironically, I guess it's ironically, I was playing an odd instrument called alto clarinet. And apparently there was no other alto clarinet player in Georgia. So he needed one for his concert band along with marching band. So the university gave me a scholarship to go to Georgia. And we might have capitalized on that a little bit by saying that I'd got a scholarship to Georgia. Not necessarily that I went there to play the alto clarinet. But when I got to Georgia, a friend of mine that I'd grown up was also enrolling. We had driven up, and we'd gone up a couple of weeks before and located a bedroom. That was all that was available. Athens was they had no dormitory space, and all the veterans returning and everything. The university was just overrun in every respect, including the registrar's office, which I got to when I got up there. That was the format was to get in line at the registrar's office.
Oh yeah.
To register. Well, I'm not even sure I even had an invitation to be a student other than I had that scholarship. And they had two lines there. There was one for the regular people applying, and then there was a scholarship line. Of course, the scholarship line was primarily filled with scholars, academics. But I lined up with all the other academics and marched in, and I was openly welcomed to the university as a student because I had this music scholarship, which incidentally, my best memory is that it paid my tuition for the quarters, and I think tuition was $18.75, $18.75, which then was a fair amount of money, but
it's a little higher today.
it's a little.
I can testify.
We've had a little experience with that. Absolutely.
So, did you know what you wanted to study, or you mentioned you had not been, the most studious pupil in school?
But I always worked at the warehouse.
Okay.
And actually, in high school, I would go down on Saturdays. They made candy on Saturday, and piddle around with them in the kitchen where they cooked it. And I got proficient at stirring it and spreading it and cutting it. And, but Daddy always had plenty of hired help, to get the work done. But I was allowed to piddle around with them, and they were quite a crew. But that's another story, I guess. But as far as the university is concerned, yeah, I loved it. I just Georgia was just so good to me in so many ways, and it helped me grow up. I was extremely immature as far as the world was concerned, but it was my thing.
Now, did you go to the University of Georgia expecting to come back and join your father in business here?
Yes,
always from the start.
I really did. Interesting about the question. When I graduated, I knew that I had to go into service. The Korean War was going full blast, and I'd actually been deferred until I graduated from being drafted. So there was no doubt in my mind that I was going in the Army or some service and not back to Waycross. And we just came across some letters recently where I had written Daddy telling him that, if he didn't feel like that he could continue, I almost laugh when I think about this, run the business, that I was going to be gone for at least 3 years and he might want to sell it. But maybe he could hang on to it. If he did, I'd like to come back and work with him. Now, you got to realize Daddy was about 55 years old when I was writing these letters about him being too old to work. And I'm sure he smiled when he got them. But anyway, yeah, I had always planned and wanted to come back.
Right. So were you in ROTC when you were at UGA?
I had 2 years of ROTC. Okay. But I was at that point, I wasn't interested in the military. And I thought the Korean War would get over. You had to take 2 years because it was land grant college.
Right.
So I do have 2 years of officer training, but I didn't pursue it beyond the 2 years, thinking that the war would be over. Well, that kid was still going strong when I graduated. So that really brought on a personal dilemma. And here's one of the events that so affected my life that I had no part in getting involved in it, other than some recruiters from the NSA, the National Security Agency, came to Athens looking for recruits. And I went to their presentation. There weren't many companies wanting to hire people back in those days, and I didn't even know what the NSA was, but I knew it was an agency that the government financed. So I got acquainted with the person who had represented the NSA, and since I realized I was going to be exposed to some military service, in the course of his presentation to the group, he said that they had a division of the NSA that was embedded in the United States Army. And they were soldiers by choice, but they worked for the NSA, and the work they did, material that they did, was sent to anyway, they had a headquarters outside of Washington. And that information became real valuable later on, or right quickly, because when I graduated, I was wanting to get in their program. And it was going to be about 3 or 4 months, assumed that they would accept me. It would be about 3 or 4 months. So I go to to the draft board and say, y'all have extended me now for 4 years, but I need another 6 months extension because I'm trying to get into it. I didn't tell them what it was because they didn't want people to know what the organization was. Well, the guy that was head of the draft board had been head of the draft board during World War II. And he had sent off plenty of people that never came back. And it didn't hurt him 1 minute to tell me, you got 30 days and you going in the Army, drafted. So I realized that trying to get employed by NSA was out of the question. So went back to the guy that had originally come, and he was a person that just took interest in people. And I explained my situation to him, and he said, well, there's one thing we can do. He said, you can join the Army. People don't realize it, but there's a difference between a draftee and a regular Army.
Right.
The way they look at you, and of course the regular Army people are thinking you're going to stay there for 20 or 30 years. That's their plans. Draftees, 2 years and they're out. But he said, you're going to have to join the regular Army and go through their basic training. And then we can get you moved into this group that are embedded in the Army collecting the data that they collected. And since that was the only chance I had, I volunteered for 3 years and went through basic training. And I was not a physical specimen, and I had an arm that didn't hardly work. But I didn't tell the people when they did the physical exam that I had any difficulty, so they took me on in.
Interesting.
But I couldn't graduate from basic training because I couldn't do all the exercises.
Right.
The captain of our group in basic training, the sergeants who were trying to work me said, this guy can't do his calisthenics, and we need to just go ahead and kick him out. And the captain said, oh, he says, too much paperwork. Said, just wait till the end of the class, and when the IG comes to inspect what these draftees have learned, they'll kick him out. The day before they came to evaluate the trainees, running to the mess hall. If you didn't want to eat the tail end of a chicken, you had to be first in line to the mess hall. So I was running down this gravel road and stumbled. And when I put my hands out on that gravel, I lacerated both palms. So I had a soft duty slip that qualified me not to proceed any further with any physical activity. By that time, they had forgot about, or didn't care about my physical condition. So they went ahead and said, yeah, he's qualified to go in the Army. I could have gotten kicked out then.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I wanted to stay in there because I wanted this experience with the NSA. And sure enough, they were as good as they were. After I had finished basic, they sent me to their NSA school in Massachusetts, Fort Devens, Massachusetts. And I saw my first snow and ice. I had a car, so I had driven myself up to Fort Devens. And Fort Devens is located in a little town called Ayer, about 30 miles outside of Boston. So I come whizzing into town on these icy roads. There was one red light in the town, and I went sliding through it all the way up on the sidewalk on the other side. But anyway, I got to the base, and I had a real good experience in the Boston area. It was just delightful in every respect, including about a half a dozen girls' schools around, and we could find dates pretty easy. So we won a crash course at Fort Devens. There were two classes. One started at 6 in the morning and went to 12, and the other started at 1 and went 7. And I was put in the early class, so we would get up. They'd get us up at 4 o'clock in the morning, dress us, feed us, and then we would march to the building where we were being trained. The idea being that most of the people would wind up in Korea, which was snow deep, foot deep in snow, and that was a good experience to march in the snow. So the old proverbial walking through the snow to school, I had about 4 or 5 months of that. And, it seemed like the snow just never melted that year, but anyway, it was a good. I enjoyed it very much. I was sent to Germany, where the NSA had a detachment embedded with NATO, and my training was not in interception, but by interception, what really took place was there were back then only 90% of communication by armies was by Morse code.
Right.
And so the Russians were on their side of the line, and our troops were on our side of the line. And our people, those that were trained to intercept code, would every day, 365 days a year, listen to the Russian people who communicated that way and copy down by hand the Morse code that they were receiving. Then that raw data was brought to Frankfurt, where I was stationed, and 90% of it was just normal gossip, normal activities of an army, from how many people went on sick call that morning to how many tanks were operational. It just covered the activities of the Russian army. And back in those days, they was anticipating that they might just come across any time. So that was, the people in this country don't know how well they were protected, because they didn't have the equipment and the manpower to have started a major war. They were just wore out from World War II. But that didn't keep us from having to gather this information. And kind of ironically, about 30 years after that, Happy and I went to Russia with the Friendship Force, and it was still the evil empire. And we saw how inadequate they were. I mean, how in the world they fought World War II, I don't know. But nothing worked over there in Russia. I mean, we were actually in Soviet Georgia, which was one of the provinces. But they had nothing. I mean, food was scarce, everything was scarce. But I'm digressing too much here. But to get back to Germany, I was there 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days, according to my military records. And generally would have the weekends off, and able to travel around. I covered everything. We couldn't go behind iron country.
Right, right.
But everything west of East Germany, down through Austria and that part of Europe, we were able to, just an hour, I mean, we were just a few hours from Paris, for example. We were able to go, and we took full advantage of that, and it was a very enlightening experience. And other than missing 3 years of a normal life, the military was good. I mean, the experience was tremendous. I appreciated the opportunities it provided for me. But here again, when I look back about the circumstances, how I got to where I was, it was just events that I had no control over, but they fell in my favor. And there's a German philosopher named Karl Marx, not to be confused with the Marx that the communists, mm-hmm. But he was an analytical philosopher, and his interest was in events that occurred and what those events created when they did occur. Mm-hmm. And he made it to him an amazing discovery. He found that more times than logic should allow, that good things happen better than bad things. If a particular circumstance had both good and bad opportunities, mathematically, he proved it mathematically, that beyond the element of chance, that more good happened than bad happened. And that just amazed me that had been discovered 102 years ago. It never, to my knowledge, never became much of a literary issue, and I don't think this particular philosopher was that much into Christianity, but as Christians, we believe that a lot of this is providential, and we are thankful for it, but we don't know why we get it.
Right.
We do.
You said you enjoyed your time in the military and that you learned a lot about the military. You served 2 years, 2 months, 2 days. Did it ever cross your mind that since you had joined the military to stay?
No, I couldn't wait to get out. As a matter of fact, by the end of my term, the war was over in Korea, right. And the Army was cutting back, and, right. And I was actually able to get out maybe a month or two early to go to graduate school. So I went back to Georgia for 1 quarter graduate school, but my motives were ulterior. I wanted to get on out of the Army. I mean, it provided a lot of opportunities, but the rigidity and the repetitiveness of a military life it wasn't my thing.
How long did it take you to transition back to waking up at a time other than 4 o'clock in the morning? And
Well, that was just when I was in school.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was just.
They let you sleep in after you.
Oh yeah. Well, but they were running those 2 schools because they were trying to train people as fast as they could. Yeah, no. Of course, the military got you up. They didn't let you stay in bed every morning, but we were housed in a what they called a Kaserne, which was a German name for a military facility where troops are stationed. Mm-hmm. And we had our own section in that Kaserne, and we were able to come and go because we worked 24/7, as opposed to there were other troops stationed there who were doing normal military duties. Since we had that ability to come and go, and they all had to check out through the MPs every day. They kind of made fun of us, if you will. But the military, I'm talking
Right,
about.
right.
But that was all right. That was all right.
So when did you get back to Waycross?
Came back to Waycross and
got to work, I guess.
Well, 1955. Well, I was discharged in May of 1955, and but that summer I went to graduate school so that I got my enlistment lowered, and that fall I came back to live in Waycross permanently and started working with the business there and going to Athens every opportunity I had. I still had connections up there, even after 3 years of absence. But we went to the Georgia-North Carolina football game, and one of my classmates was Sonny Soller from Savannah, and Sonny had Uga, but he wasn't known as Uga then. He was just a white bulldog, and on the way up, we got arrested for driving too fast, and sheriff was kind enough not to lock us up, but we told him we didn't have enough money to pay the fine. We did, but we were trying to get out of it. And so there were 5 of us in the car, and we sat in the sheriff's out of office there while we tried to come up with the money or try to get him to let us off free, which he didn't do. We finally paid our way out and went on to Chapel Hill. And that night before the game, the North Carolina Stewart stole Uga and painted him blue, Carolina blue. And this was about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning when Sonny finally found him. And then we had to get a veterinarian because he was afraid because he was covered in paint that he might expire. Well, I don't think that would have happened. But anyway, the veterinarian, I think, gave us some turpentine or something. Said, just wash him down, boys. that dog's all right. So anyway, he was ready for the game the next day. And Charlie Choo Choo Justice was a football star for North Carolina. And even on the Methodist Church sermon that Sunday was all the way Choo Choo. So we got to see, for whatever that's worth, we got to see Choo Choo Justice play football. And I carried on, went to as many games as I could for several years until I ran into this beautiful lady, and my whole life changed. And,
well, tell me about that. When did you meet your wife,
or
the girl who became your wife?
That's right. That's right. To make this part of the conversation very short, I had a girlfriend that most people did at Georgia, and but we didn't continue after I went in the service. So, and there's another blessing. Man, there was a blessing. I got such a good wife, 61 plus years, and there's another event. I mean, she just came walking into my life one day, and that was it. And then to top it all off, we had 6 wonderful children, and they were such a joy to raise and grow up with. And we were extremely proud of the fact that all 6 graduated from the university. And now our grandchildren, we've got 4 or 5 that have graduated and more up there. So we've been a part of the university a long time. And, but I just keep going back to how these circumstances, just time after time after time, worked out. Certainly in my life, and I see people who weren't that blessed, and who grew up with me and did no things. Neither one of us did things differently, but how different our lives were. And, that is my prayer, that I'm worthy of even that many gifts that I've been given.
So what was it like coming back and working with your father? You know, you're married now. You're starting your family. Your early career with Stewart Candy.
Yeah, let me speak to that. That's where life really started. Daddy had these employees that had been with him for 15 or 20 years, and he had a regimen established where they ran these routes and sold the candy that he made, and particularly the candy. By then, most of his business was selling national brands of candy, and so that format was working real well. And so for the first number of years, Daddy died in '59, but we just carried on that same format as long as these original employees were physically able to do it. And that gave Happy and I time to enjoy our children and take trips with them and all those good things. And so around 1980, Jimmy graduated from Georgia and came to work in the company. And in 1982, something that changed our lives and changed our business model and made it a whole new world available to us was Eli Witt Company was the dominant wholesaler in the South. And they were out of Tampa, Florida, and they have a Tampa cigar company. Mm-hmm. And they had a candy and tobacco warehouse in just about every Georgia and Florida city, including Waycross. And they were so powerful until they had all the tobacco brands exclusively. Now, we were able to buy cigarettes, but the other tobacco products, other than a few King Edward cigars, were the exclusive property of Eli Witt. And tobacco controlled the retail business. If you didn't have a full tobacco line, you were extremely limited as what you could really offer a retail customer. But our company had struggled competed through the years with that handicap, and had certainly provided a good lifestyle for us. But Mr. Witt had died a number of years ago. The people that he had trained were now retiring, so it was time for that company to take a new look at their game plan. And the people who were running it made a decision to sell all of the small houses in the small towns and concentrate big houses in the cities. So the local Eli Witt business became, house became available. Mm. And our company policy had always been to be friendly with your competitors. Don't knock them, don't put them down, try to outsell them, but don't be unkind.
Right.
So because of that history, when they got ready to sell this house in Waycross, they sold it to us. There were other wholesalers they could have sold it to, but they sold it to us. And that gave us all the line of merchandise that we'd never had before. They provided us, this may be questionable, but it provided us with 3 salesmen who were the most inadequate as a salesman they were letting go. And we soon had to work through them, but we got some good warehouse help, and we got some good secretary out of it. But here again, the fate just smiled on us, And with Jimmy coming back, and then Dean came back, and Sam came back, and Amy, who had had a career of her own, came back, and we started. Or I'm gonna remove my pronoun. They really started growing this business, and they are the ones that deserve the credit for what you see around here today. Was a family that came back and made an institution out of a very small business.
So is that in 1982 when Eli Witt sold out locally? That's when the Stewart Candy Company really started diversifying.
Well, we had so much more product to sell.
Right.
And they were so nice to us. Eli Witt people were. They had a house in Savannah, and I think they may have had one in Albany, I'm not sure. But anyway, the Savannah house would sell to us these products that we had not previously been able to buy, and they would help us fill in our inventory because they were just good people, and they wanted to do the right thing, and they did the right thing. And that enabled us to really get established with a huge inventory that we had never had before. And from that, the guys brought in what we called advanced selling. Prior to that, and really when Jimmy came back, we were still selling off of a truck. I mean, the salesman came down to the warehouse each morning, loaded the truck with merchandise, went out and sold it, and repeated that procedure during the week. Well, we switched over to advanced selling, where the salesman only sold, and the company then delivered what he had sold. And that greatly expanded the capability of the salesperson to spend time selling and not hauling stuff in a store and writing up the invoice on the counter there and that type of thing. So that was another expansion opportunity that we were able to take advantage of. And we slowly replaced these three salesmen that Eli Witt had so generously let us have. And then they started building the sales force that we have today, which is.
How big of an area does Stewart Candy distribute to?
All of Georgia and a good part of Florida.
Okay.
Now, we have to stay out of the metropolitan areas up there because of the traffic. I mean, the guys have a division here called Georgia Commissary Supply that services jails and prison institute, right. And they happen to have a customer right in downtown Atlanta, and the traffic is so bad, and we have to commit to a time to deliver that we can't depend on it. So we have to ship it up there. This is an unusual situation, but it makes the point that in South Georgia, it's hard for you to sell in Atlanta or the big city. We have to hire a local deliverer up there to take the order to the prison because he can do it at the right time. So we don't go into Atlanta or the metropolitan areas, and but as far as servicing independents and small chains, that's our bread and butter, and I think we do that very efficiently and effectively, in most of Georgia and parts of North Florida.
We were talking before the camera started rolling. We were talking about roads and building roads in South Georgia and other parts of Georgia. How has the infrastructure in this part of the state? How has that affected and impacted your build?
And I'm glad that y'all discussed it, because when the original business I came to, transportation was so difficult, we didn't work but 30 miles
Right.
from Waycross. It was our longest route. And as the Interstates came along, and then we had an individual here who was had a lot of influence with the highway people, and long story short, he got the concept of what we call Corridor Z built, and that was a multi-lane highway from Brunswick to Columbus. Now, you talk about opening up our territory. Golly, did that open it up. I mean, if we'd had to service those things on two-lane highways, we couldn't have done it.
Right.
So that was another blessing that just fell into our laps. And actually, here in Waycross, we were sitting kind of in the center of two interstates, 75 and 95. And here comes all these million cars a year down those two interstates, dumping money off. Even they may not spend it in a store that we sell, but it supports the economy that does buy from that store. So the interstates were just a blessing. Corridor Z from Waycross to Columbus was a blessing. We were able to get service as far as Columbus effectively, and these are things that we had no control over, didn't know they were happening, but we were able to capitalize on them, and that's the reason we've been able to grow the business. Aside from the fact how people have been very efficient in growing the business, I don't think there's a wholesaler left in Georgia like us.
Well, it's interesting that you've been talking about sort of serendipity and fate. That 1982 and the 1980s, that was the period of they called them developmental highways back then with Joe Frank Harris and Zell Miller, that giving those 4-lane highways to places like Corridor Z and the Fall Line Freeway that weren't connected by those interstates. And sort of the economic impact that you
and our population growth has been tremendous in Georgia. I mean, we're not up with Florida and California and Texas, but heck, we're right near the top. Population growth. So all of that's added to it, and it's made a customer base that's large enough. We compete with several national distributors, wholesale distributors, who are very effective, and they're tough competition. And the really big chains we can't touch because those big chains want one supplier all over the country. But we are growing, and we'll get there one day.
Well, at the risk of giving them free advertising, but who are those national competitors?
McLean is the largest, and the most effective. Core-Mark is the next largest, and guys, what's
E.B. Brown.
E.B. Brown.
H.T. Hackney. H.T. Hackney.
H.T. Hackney. Yeah. Those some of those are regional. Several of them are national.
So how have you and then later your children sought to differentiate yourself from the competition, at least here in Georgia and North Florida?
Well, actually, we don't. We just stand up and outsell them. Try to outsell them. Both. I hate to say price, but certainly with service. I think that I know the service that we provide, these national companies can't touch it. And they can't touch the personal relationship. When a Stuart walks in a store, the atmosphere, initially they might get a little cold shoulder, but a retailer or a small chain like to deal with the boss. And our guys are the boss, and they get calls all the time. And with the communication systems we have today, they hear every complaint and every problem that the customer has. But that differentiates you from a large corporation that has a very hard, cold approach to business. They're able to buy the merchandise cheaper than we can.
Sure.
And they have maybe more powerful computer systems than we have, but they don't have the personal touch that we have.
Well, that sort of touches on my next question. We've talked about infrastructure and transportation. How has the technology changed in the sort of the logistics of wholesaling and distribution?
You can't. Well, it's impossible to describe. We went from where we wrote out on a pad the order to now it comes in over the wire. Nobody even sees it. It goes back to the pickers, and they don't even know what they're picking. It's just a number to them there, and it's also automated until it's. In a short time, I can't describe it how it really works, and sometimes I wonder how it works, and sometimes it doesn't. It flubs up, but communication. I mean, is both the customer and your people. A problem that used to have to be discussed at a sales meeting once or twice a month is discussed in real time when it happens. Mm-hmm. And that really enables you to be more effective, more efficient with solving problems. So, yeah, it's a fast world now, and we try to be as up to date as we can be.
I read somewhere that and we sort of touched on it in the interview, but that convenience stores are the primary outlet for the products that you distribute.
That's great.
Has it always been that way, the sort of small and independent stores, or how has that changed, the outlets for the goods?
Yeah, let me speak to that because it's been quite a progression. My daddy sold to retail grocery stores and retail establishments that were owned by the person that you were selling to.
Right.
And it was a very personal relationship. And you either got the business because your own or it was a relationship thing. And slowly the chains started coming in. I can remember when A&P had 7 grocery stores in Waycross, Georgia. They weren't large. They had 7 grocery stores, and the talk on the street was that you don't need to be a wholesaler. I said, A&P is going to run everything. Well, most people today don't even know who A&P was.
Exactly.
Right. These people that weren't going to exist or exist, and A&P is gone. And that's just an example. And it progressed from putting that candy every morning on a truck and taking it out and off that truck all day and coming back and reloading the next day, to now where it's all done automated and picking's automated, loading's automated. The main contact we have is really with our drivers, who they're the ones that really see our customers now. Now we've got salesmen that call on them.
Sure.
But the personal relationship, while it exists at the top level, it's not like it was in those old days. And the customer base changed from the locally owned grocery store and the locally owned drug store and the locally owned drive-in and all those kind of things have all moved to chains. Mm-hmm. And that business a lot of it has moved away from it. And goodness knows Walmart changed everything.
Tell me about how so?
Well, because of their price and their mass distribution and their ability to provide what the people wanted. It's no easy step to run a distribution system to get the product from the manufacturer to get it to the store where it's going to be sold. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't believe the problem with truck lines. You wouldn't believe the problems with missed shipments. You wouldn't believe the problem with the manufacturer defects or not meeting his production quota. There's just 100 reasons why distribution is difficult and why it has to be where it is between the manufacturer and the retailer. Now, people like Walmart and some of the others have taken over the warehouse part of it. I mean, they are integrated from buying from the manufacturer to selling to the retailer. and that's what's made them so big. But they and their pricing and their availability of product has made them. In some products we just don't even carry anymore because they've so captured the market. School supplies is a prime example. At one time, I bet a third of our business was selling school supplies to schools.
Really?
Yeah. Every school had a little room where they sold paper and pencils and crayons and different things that the kids needed in school, and it was a good business. It was a great part of our business was selling school supplies because the school was always there.
Always going to need them.
You always going to need them, and you could collect your money from them, and they were just a good customer. Along comes Walmart and some of the others, and they offer the school supplies a third of what we had to charge for it, and then the social aspect of it came about that the schools, it was a profit center for them. And while the schools were kind of run individually, they could manage their affairs. But when schools got so integrated, both academically and supply-wise, they stopped selling school supplies in the schools, and that it all went to the big chains. Another customer base that we lost that was really good and one we enjoyed was the black community. At one time, I'm sure half of our business was sold to black little black stores where they carried candy and gum and mints and some small food products. And at that time, of course, the social system was that the blacks were in one part of town and the whites were in the other.
Right.
And they didn't really cross over very much. And these black stores sold to the black people. And those black merchants were just as honest and straight as they could be. And they appreciated a white distributor providing them with the things to sell. And that became such a big part of our business. And then, I don't know how to word this, but the federal government started providing money to minorities and disfranchised people. And then, since they had this flow of revenue, they were able to go to the Walmarts and to the Krogers of this world and buy like the rest of society. And I hope I'm wording this right. I mean, there was just a time when integration was the way of life. And we happened to have items that the black community needed, and there was basically nobody to sell it to them. Mm-hmm. And we built up some good relationships with our black customers, and all that went away with welfare, if you will.
Well, I think you've touched on this a little bit about the different products that you were selling and distributing, but with Walmart and these national companies being able to at least shape distribution through their economies of scale that you were talking about,
right.
Have you seen an influence in sort of nationalizing trends or tastes or things that only Southerners used to have that have gone national, or things that came into the South that when this company started you didn't distribute or sell?
That's right. Oh yeah. That's that. At one time, merchandise was scattered, and weather in the South makes a big difference.
Right.
We couldn't sell chocolates in the summer. all the chocolate candy was made up north. In fact, most all candy was made up north. And they would not even ship chocolates until about October. And then they stopped shipping chocolates at Easter. That was kind of the spread that you could buy chocolate candy. And with refrigeration and air conditioning and all, that's, of course, that's changed all of that now, and it's the 365-day
Right.
supply of whatever people want. And the ability to integrate distribution from the manufacturer to the consumer the efficiency has increased so much until it's held the price down, really. We think things are high price now, but if we didn't have an efficient distribution system, we'd be paying 10 times what we pay for merchandise today. So, and we've just kind of tagged along and got our little bit of that pie, and it's enabled us to survive.
So, do you think that technology and transportation, that those improvements, that's what, back in the day, food took up a large chunk of a family's budget, and the price of food is relatively either declined or stayed relatively steady. And you think it's those improvements that have made that the case?
Absolutely. And in international distribution, people are not generally aware of how much food products we import. We make a piece of candy that has honey in it. And just doing some research on honey, we're trying to establish a brand value to that honey. We found out that 70% of the honey that's sold in the United States is imported.
Really?
And it's things like that, numbers that people are not aware of. That and I was just Happy and I were in the supermarket this week, and we buy up a year's supply of blueberries when they first come in. And our supply was getting a little low, and I wondered if we ran out, could we get some? Heck, they had a whole cooler in Kroger of blueberries, and every one of them was imported.
Yep.
Every one of them was imported.
South American blueberries.
Yeah. And that's just a microcosm of world trade today.
I think people assume computers, televisions, there's the assumption that that's going to be imported, but for some reason in people's minds that foodstuffs aren't necessarily imported. But as you've made clear, it's not quite the case.
Those of us that are selling food products, we try to make that clear to them. They mean this is made in the USA. And Waycross, Georgia, we proudly announce that everything we get is local.
Right.
Yeah, locally produced and locally manufactured. And that's about the only selling point we've got against some of the imported stuff, because they can ship it so much cheaper, produce it so much cheaper overseas.
Oh, right.
And almost dump it in this country. Yeah.
You were talking before we started rolling about your time with the Chamber of Commerce. Back when Carl Sanders was elected governor. Tell me about your experience, your experience in civic life, in your interactions as a businessman in government, in locally in Georgia. Here
again. When I came back to Waycross, I was invited to join the JCs. The JCs are hardly known today.
The Junior Chamber of Commerce, right?
Yeah. I wasn't old enough to be in the senior chamber. But it was made up of people who had come back from World War II and had gotten an education that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise, and they had jobs and positions that honored their training and experience. And they wanted a social vehicle to express it in. And the Junior Chamber of Commerce, which later became JCs just by definition, provided that outlet. And man, being in the JCs in the late 50s and early 60s was the place to be. I mean, Happy and I went to these conventions. They had quarterly meetings and an annual meeting, and everybody got together and got to know each other, and it just opened up your world.
Did you participate in what did they call them? This would have been about in the 50s and 60s, maybe into the 70s. They used to call them red carpet tours, where they would bring industrial recruits around.
Not personally, but
okay.
Georgia had a red carpet tour. They sure did. Atlanta controlled that.
Mm-hmm.
They jumped on that big time, and the state had this industrial growth group, and that was right down their bailiwick, and yeah. But we benefited from it, I guess, to the extent that as they went around the state, they shared the products and information that was individually valuable to us.
Right. I was getting ready to ask, is like, for an established business, what's it like to look at so many resources poured into bringing in new business or to recruit new business? Is there ever a sense that there needs to be more support and promotion for established business?
The only thing constant is change.
Yeah.
So, yeah. You just try to stay a little ahead of the curve, but not too far ahead of the curve, because
you don't want to get too far ahead.
You don't always make the right decisions, so you want to be doggone sure of your base before you move too far.
So, in your opinion, you've been in business since the mid-1950s.
55.
What is it that local, county, state government can do to support business best, in your opinion?
Well, I guess the schools are the first thing. If you don't have good schools or trade schools, the flow of good employees is cut off. Infrastructure, roads, well maintained, a community that's well maintained. I mean, when people come through, and I think Waycross does a good job of that, they see a nice, clean community. And even though they may not stop here and do business, they get a good impression. And we found that we have on our candy that we manufacture made in Waycross, Georgia. And we get comments from all over the nation about that. About what is Waycross? Where's Waycross? Yeah. We had, I don't know, I need to, we do some private labor work, sell to big companies with their name. And we were selling a company which I cannot identify, and not even to the location, but a family who their daughter got together with a local boy from down at Sea Island from Waycross, and they wound up getting married, and so they were coming from western states to Waycross because of that. And they brought some gifts to give out locally, and what they bought was the candy we made, sold under another company's name out west, and so they brought it back to Waycross and gave it as a gift. It's a kind of a small world, but that's kind of unusual. But yeah.
So sort of, I guess the other side of that coin is what is the responsibility of a company, a business that's been established in this community? What does it mean to have Stuart candy here in Waycross as opposed to selling out and moving to the big city or something like that?
Well, there are. I think there always will be a part of a community that doesn't want to move to the big city. Mm-hmm. They don't want that kind of lifestyle. And if they are not businesses like ours that provide a steady stream of job opportunities, then those people would have to go somewhere else. the small business, and we're a small business by comparison, they're the bulwark, the social bulwark of a community. And we feel a social responsibility to participate in social activities that benefit the community. Our personal policy is that we don't use our name, but that's just, we're kind of different maybe in that regard. But what we do, we don't publicize, but we do it. And it makes our conscience, I think, feel better. But anyway, local people helping local people, it's the lifeblood. And that's what they lose in these big cities. And if they keep putting all the monkeys in one tree, I don't know where society is going. I mean, the small towns, that's where the people with common sense, if you will, that's where they live.
I'm from a small town of 700 people in southern Illinois, so
okay.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Even though I live in Athens
yeah.
now. So tell me, where do you foresee Stuart Candy and Stuart distribution, 10, 20 years down? What does the future hold for your small business?
What other opportunities are available? We have morphed from a one product business, that is Daddy making peanut brittle and peppermint, and we carry nearly 10,000 different items in this warehouse. And we've just managed to change with the times. Now, let me emphasize, there are other companies that have done a better job of it, but there's a whole lot of them that have done a poor job of evolution and distribution. And so I think the fact that what you see here is some evidence that we've been able to hold our own in it.
Right.
Yeah.
Not a lot of small businesses can say, as we're quickly approaching the 100th anniversary, 3 years from now.
Yes, and there are 2, maybe 3 wholesalers left in Georgia, and they are basically very small. All the rest belong to the big chains and to us.
So consolidation has not skipped the wholesale business, just like it has every other industry and sector, I suppose. So tell me about the peanut brittle and why that was the signature product at the beginning.
Okay, well, well, first of all, the ingredients are very simple and they're very available. It had sugar, corn syrup, and peanuts. And if you think about those are basic food provider of nourishment for human existence. And during the Depression, a person could buy a 5-cent Stewart peanut brittle bar, 6 ounces, and could actually live off of it. And there was enough nourishment in that bar of candy to literally to provide life substance.
Sure.
And the comment on about somebody asked about the Hubbard Cypress Company. They were the biggest employer here, and but they kept most of their employees on an island in the swamp, so they'd always report to work the next day without a bad head or anything. So all that they consisted on had to be sent into the swamp park. And they had built a little tram train, if you will, right down the street in Waycross from Daddy's store. And each day that train went in, and it took the supplies to this town on an island in the swamp where all the workers were living. And so he had almost a daily customer that bought a lot of his production to supply that one spot, and it it was a shock to him when they finally closed the mill, but it ran for many, many years. And,
Now, was that turpentine and Navy stores?
No, it was cypress trees.
Oh, the
Yeah,
actual
those
lumber.
cypress
Okay.
trees had grown there for thousands of years, and nobody had ever had the equipment to harvest it with. But the Hubbard family, they wintered in South Georgia along the St. Mary's River. They were big sawmill people up in Pennsylvania, and they were intrigued by this swamp full of cypress trees. And they had the wherewithal and the foresight to develop equipment that could go into the swamp and harvest these huge cypress trees, bring them to a mill out on the edge of Waycross, and saw them up into lumber. And I don't know how many years, but certainly 10 or 15 years they took to cut that swamp. It was 24/7 job. Everybody had a job that worked there, and they were an economic engine for the community. And since Daddy was making a product that people enjoyed eating and could afford to buy, it was just a natural for him. And from 22 until 32 were pretty good, well, real good years for him. I was looking at he was a very meticulous person. He kept a record each year of what he had, his business was, and I've got one on my desk there. In 1932, he netted out about $1,800. In 1933, he only netted out $86. That's all he made that year. And that was the depth of the Depression.
Right.
Yeah, and there was no business, no money, no nothing. Now, he lived out of the business before he came with that net figure, so it's somewhat extorted. But that's how hard times were. $28 is what he made in the whole year's work, after expenses.
Since we talked about peanut brittle, and I had a question down here anyway. How did peppermints come about? Why was that such a signature
it's made
item?
of the same ingredient,
Okay.
sugar and corn syrup.
Sure.
Yeah, and the peanuts are actually just a bonus to the sugar and corn syrup, and peanuts, of course, add the flavoring to that bar, and the ball you have to put the peppermint flavor in there, or other flavors. I mean, we make a lot of different flavors. Today we've got some blueberries and the things that weren't even thought about 150 years ago.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask about UGA football. Were you an avid football watcher, fan? During the Wally Butts days, I guess it would have been?
My old maid aunt took me in 1942 to Athens to see Georgia play Georgia Tech. And that was when Frankie Sinkwich and Charlie
Trippy too.
Were both on the team. And Georgia Tech had a star player. They were 1 and 2 in the nation, Tech and Georgia were. I can't pull his name up, and he was killed in World War II. Castleberry, thank you. And that was the game of the century for Georgia. So my aunt and I left. They took me to Valdosta, where my aunt lived. We got on the train on Friday morning, went to Atlanta, got a train from Atlanta to Athens.
Back when you could do that.
Yes. And rented a room in a home, because there were only the Holman and there were two hotels in Athens then.
The Georgian and the
Georgian and Holman, yeah. So when that football crowd came in, there was no place for them to stay.
It's still like that, even
It's even worse.
Hotels.
Sure, yeah, but we spent the night, Friday night, in a private home out on the edge of town, and we got a taxi into the stadium time for the game, And Sanford Stadium was small then compared to what it is now, and but it was filled up. In fact, it was hard for her to get us tickets to even come to the game. But we got to see Georgia play in 1942, and I haven't missed a lot of them since.
Have you met all the Uggas since you knew the original one? Have you known everyone since?
Yeah, Sonny and I usually meet at sometime during. We both stay. Our family stays in the center there, and Sonny stays there. So we see them every year. And Ivy lives in Savannah now, and she and the daughter,
Swan,
are friends. Yeah, and in fact well, I don't want to put this on record. No, it's about a business situation that Sonny had to help us with over there. In our home, and I'll qualify this, that this is more legend than I can support by fact. But the fact is the piano is in our home. And the fact is that my immediate aunts and uncles brought it with them from Dawson, Georgia. The story is that when Sherman came through Georgia, they were living up in middle Georgia, and they hid this piano out in the woods, and it was the only thing that survived the war. I get emotional when I talk about it. But anyway, it has that history to it. Mm-hmm. And so I'm counting on my family to take care of what Happy has some pieces of furniture that is as important to her as that, and we're counting on them to take care of them.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that,
okay.
And glad we could get that recorded.
I don't really know how to word this other than Daddy grew up in such poverty, but very proud of his family and how they survived. The conditions of the time, they were no different from any other people living on a 40-acre farm in West Georgia. Anyway, he had been able to provide for his family, myself and my mother. Mm-hmm. And it was important to him that I have advantages that not everybody was able to have. So when I graduated from high school, he bought me a red convertible. And it gave him a great pleasure to be able to have his son with physical, material gifts that he was not able to have. And you know, it really, a red convertible really wasn't my DNA. I only kept it a year, and I never really was comfortable in traveling in it because it attracted attention. And I've never wanted personal attention from anybody except my family. And anyway, I had the convertible. And so when I graduated from high school, we went down to Miami. And this story gets so distorted until I may be telling another version of it. But it was simply nothing more than 4 or 5 high school seniors going to the big city. And we picked out the biggest hotel in Miami, and 2 people went in there and rented a room, and the other 5 came and slept, you know, that kind of thing. And, we did our scene on the beach and came back home. So that's about all there is to that story. Now, some other versions of it, but that's the true version. They gave you a battery of psychological tests to see what your makeup was. And one of the tests they gave was how well you could keep a secret and how well you could live next to a person in your room or wherever they booked you, and not know what he did, and not tell him what you did, and not be bothered by that. That was the gist of that. And it was when they really separated the applicants. And those who could not, and it was not an IQ test, let me emphasize that, it was what are you made of test. And in that room, there were two doors. One door meant you didn't get in the agency. The other door meant you got in the agency. And there was probably 30 or 40 of us in that room. And they emptied it down to one person, that was me. I'm sitting there, two monitors, and the guy that was conducting the meeting. And he called those two monitors up to his table, and they talked a few minutes, and he pointed to the door that you passed. Later on, I ran into that monitor, and I said, what was going on up there? Why was I held until the end? And he said, they thought you had cheated. They had never seen that high score on an aptitude test, and they thought you had a key to it. And we assured them that you didn't have a key. That was really what you thought. That was your mindset. So.
And that was that was after you had joined the Army and gone through the basic and everything, and then did all the tests before you could go, I guess, up to Massachusetts.
Yeah, because see, we had a top secret clearance. I mean, we could look into a document that the government had, and they sent the FBI agent to Waycross, and he checked my background, and we got some interesting comments from that.
I was just getting ready to say, I'm sure that didn't go unnoticed.
It did not
in Waycross in 1952.
Yeah, they were really serious about security then. Today, anybody can get apparently anybody can get a security a clearance that can vote for the right people. Mm-hmm. But in 1952, security was a big deal.
Right.
And they were very thorough. And we would have people in our group that would violate, maybe not even intentionally, some security requirements. And in the dead of night, the CID, the criminal division of the Army, would come into where we were. This happened in our room. There was 8 of us to a room. They came in there about 2 o'clock in the morning, woke one of the people up in there, and they said, fill up your duffel bag and follow us. And they went out there and put him on a plane and sent him back to the States. He had done something. We never knew. But he had violated some of those security rules, whatever they were. But that's how thorough they were. If you were monitored unbeknowingly and not knowing it, but this guy was just a normal person as far as we knew, but he had done something that he shouldn't have done, security-wise.
Right.
And they snatched him out of there in a heartbeat.
Bet that made an impression.
Yeah, you better believe. Yeah, the guy that was one of my best friends and still alive today. Happy and I saw him at a church conference a few years ago. I never knew what he did. We slept side by side for 2 years. He worked in another division. And only in conversation over at church conference, he mentioned where he got his training. And he was trained in Augusta. And the agency had a radio division down there where they taught them to do certain radio procedures. And for the first time, I realized what he was doing, but I never knew it for the 2 years that we were together.
That's it. I mean, I guess the signals people didn't know what the analysts like you were doing.
They did not. And we were just a stop-off, really, for the information we gathered. Really hard stuff. I mean, translate. Breaking the codes came back to Washington, to the NSA. And they did hard work. We were able to, the daily codes, which they used every day, we could pretty much break them at the local level. And and it carried very little information of value other than who went on sick call and
Right.
what kind of capability they might have had at the camp that day. That kind of stuff we gathered.
Were you ever able to go to Berlin while you were over in Germany?
Yes. We had to fly in. We were not able. They didn't let us go on a train.
Right.
Obviously, but we could fly in. And of course, they had almost nonstop planes going to and from Frankfurt, where I was, to Berlin. And you go down on the weekend, and if a plane wasn't loaded, you could get it. And we could do that around Europe. There was the government had a airline called MATS, Military Air Transport Service, and MATS was just as big as Eastern or American or anything today, but they only flew military people on military business, and we could go to the Rhine-Main Airport at their MATS terminal. And if they had a flight going to London or to Paris we went down to Casablanca a couple of times on these MATS flights that were going because the government had to transport people, but they had empty seats on there, and they let us fly as a passenger, no cost. And so that enabled us to really open up where we could travel.
Right.
Around, because you can do that on the weekend.
Nice little, a nice fringe benefit, of course.
Oh,
I mean,
but you know,
had to do your service.
Very few people ever took advantage of it. No, it wasn't crowded at all. I mean, there were a lot of flights that we couldn't get on because they had military business.
Sure.
We got stranded in Madrid one time for 3 days at the airport there because the flights that came in were all filled, and we couldn't get back. And we were doing some scrambling to tell them why we hadn't gotten it back.
Yeah, rent a car and go cross country.
No, we actually waited until we got a plane that had room for us on it.
You got to tour Casablanca.
Yeah, okay, Casablanca, okay.
And this is the post-war
what we
years.
actually did, we flew into to an air base outside of Casablanca on a MATS flight, and we stayed there. And they had for people on business, they had accommodations for them, and if there was a bed available, they'd let us stay there. So we stayed at the air base there outside of Casablanca and went in during the day. And but before you could go off the base, you had to go through an orientation session with local public relation people as to how to act and what you could do and what, because at that time Morocco was a province of France, and the French actually control the government, although they use local Moroccans to run it. So we were there as a guest of the French government, and we had to do what they expected us to do. And one of the things was not to go into the Casbah. Now, the Casbah is the old section of town. Every town in the Middle East has a Casbah. In Turkey, they have a different name for it, but it's the merchant. It's where the local people do business. There's no transportation in there. Everything's by foot. But all of the local merchants that sell to the local people have a booth or a stall in the Casbah. And it is heavily traveled. And it's not a safe place for Western work, at that time, for Western people. And so we were instructed not to go into Casbah. But, you know, the devil got the best of us. So we went into Casbah. And sometimes they're a mile long with these shops on both sides, and a fairly narrow road, maybe not any wider than this room. And the people are just shoulder to shoulder all the way through there. And we had gone in there maybe just not more than a few hundred yards, and we realized that it was solid people behind us. I mean, we were just locked in to the crowd, which was slowly moving. And out of the clear blue sky, what appeared to be an Arab or a local citizen, in a garb and everything, walked came to us, and he said, in perfect English, "Get out of here as fast as you can, you're in danger." Well, we got out of there. We had to knock a few people down getting out, but to this day, I don't know whether that was just a jokester. They said, "Hey man, I'm more scared of these Yankees," and that kind of thing, or whether it was a serious situation. But we didn't stay there to find out. So I didn't go to Casbah until we were in Ankara, and there, of course, it's open to all of the public. They don't even call it Casbah. They call it, what was the name of it? The shopping center there. Anyway, it was safe as us sitting right here.
But in Europe, we're talking 1952, 53, 54, 55.
Yeah.
Relatively recently after World War II. Tell me about the different places that you could go. You mentioned earlier that there weren't a lot of tourists in a lot of these places.
There weren't. That's right, and there were no new hotels.
Right.
Some of the old traditional hotels, of course, were in existence, and they were well established and well patronized by really the top end of the tourist business. But there were many places where we had to stay in almost a flop house because there was just no other accommodations. Some of the places we slept in, I wouldn't go in them today, but that was the only thing that was available to us. And, but even there, a lot of them, of course, run by a family, and you felt safe with them.
Sure.
And they were. Sometimes they would actually feed you, because you paid them for it. But there's more of that than staying at the Ritz-Carlton. Which we obviously didn't stay at. Period.
But no, definitely a different experience that exists
it was,
there today.
For example, we went to the coast of Florida, of France, Morocco. Not Morocco. What's the name of the
Marseille?
Well, Marseille. We went to Marseille,
down
but
in the south.
It was there was a principality there.
Monaco.
Monaco. We went to Monaco, and the casino at Monaco at that time was world renowned.
Right.
There weren't many casinos of that quality, but they had so few tourists until we were accepted there because they wanted, hopefully, for us to play the wheels. And actually we did, some of it, but not to gamble to make money, but just to say, hey, I played roulette in Monaco.
Right.
And
James Bond.
Yeah. I learned right quick that there was two ways to bet fairly safely, and that was on color and number. And the wheel has only two colors on it, alternating colors.
Right.
So you could bet that when the wheel stopped, that it stopped on orange, or it stopped on black, and you had a 49% chance. There was one thing on the wheel that belonged to the house, so you didn't have a 50-50 chance of winning. And that's all they needed to make money.
Just enough.
But that was pretty safe betting. And then you could bet on number, whether it was odd or even.
Right.
Yeah. And there again, it was close to a 50-50 chance, but again, it could stop on that one spot that belonged to the house.
Yeah, the green zero.
Yeah, and everything, they sweep the table and everything went to it. Yeah.
Well, I didn't think I was going to get gambling advice when I woke up this morning.
Oh, no, it was just fun. We carried the story maybe a little further. bikinis were just coming in at that time. Literally, they would come down on the beach, and one girl would hold a towel, and they were against a wall, and they would change into their bikini. Then they paraded up and down the beach. And we made pictures of our observing those occasions, and we would send them back to the fraternity house and said, just wanted you guys to know that we're off defending your country, and it's mighty hard work over here, and we sure hate to have to do it, but this is what we're experiencing. So.
Well, I think that is a good place
Yeah, it is.
finish up.
We've gone from the sublime to the ridiculous here now.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to get down on tape for posterity? Not that we use tapes anymore.
I want to apologize to posterity for taking up their time if they listen to this dialogue, but I appreciate the university, appreciate you and the university thinking enough of us to come down and conduct it. And,
Absolutely.
We are honored to have you here.
Well, we're honored to be here and glad to do our part. So on behalf of the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia, Mr. James Stewart Jr., thank you very much.
And thank you.